Work towards this exhibition unwittingly began about 5 years ago, when a piece called Lighthouse was made as a gift for someone I felt represented this structure. For me, an artwork is the result of a series of responses. Often what I respond to are things I have read in literature, myth, poetry, or heard in folk stories. There are certain characters and events, or it's sometimes just a feeling I get, that stays with me. Along with what I take away from these stories, I also respond to the histories, techniques, and materials that I work with. This artwork, called "And Nature Shivered at Approaching Death," is a good example of this interplay of various influences. During the making of an earlier work, titled Ghosted, I used a piece of tracing paper covered in charcoal powder to try and trace an image onto a lino plate. I rather liked the image created by the charcoal dust, and I tried to find a number of ways to recreate that smoky quality using printmaking techniques. The colograph print you see at the top of And Nature Shivered is the first of those experiments. I thought it was rather unsuccessful on its own, but it unexpectedly found a place in this artwork. The work and title also resulted from a story I read at the time about Dido, the Queen of Carthage, particularly the moment that led up to her death. In this work, The Golden Bough, I managed to create the smoky effect more successfully, this time using stone lithography. Around this time, I also recalled a story I had read about the Trojan Aeneas. In order for him to reach the underworld and further his quest, he is instructed by a sibyl to find something called the Golden Bough, a rare plant which has a dark, uninviting exterior but is golden underneath. This work, called Of Lift 2, The Lesser Gods, began as an attempt to recreate some scrap materials that I used during the screen printing process. Those were largely bits of newsprint and masking tape. I find these throwaway materials quite aesthetic in their own right, and in this case I tried to recreate them using more lasting materials. My choice of materials was partly influenced also by a translation of an Ashanti story called How the Abossum, the Lesser Gods, Came into the World. Lighthouses feature throughout the exhibition, especially the Cape Recife Lighthouse in Port Elizabeth, Iberga. In this work, I tried to capture the lighthouse, the structures that surround it, and also just the general area on a rough day. I did this using woodcut, and I printed the wooden plate on fabric using very basic printmaking technology, namely a spoon and a bottle. Touch and Go was one of the first artworks I produced during the national lockdown, when artists' access to materials and facilities was generally quite limited. Some years ago, I tried out a paper marbling technique. Those experiments did not really come to anything, and they lived in a drawer until March of 2020. I then cut them up and stitched them, in quite a random manner, to other drawings and proof prints that I had found in the same drawer. Chance played a rather significant role during the making of this piece. The process of stitching prints together started with this piece, The Passage of Time. Again, it was some years ago that I printed a rather large edition of lino cut prints, which ultimately I was not entirely happy with, and I put them away for a rainy day. In December of 2019, I rediscovered these prints and I began cutting them up. The overall shape the individual pieces took was very much directed by the limitation and challenge of trying to stitch them together. I became aware of time during the creation of this work, which ultimately became the content of the piece. Lighthouse 2 also centers on the Cape Recife Lighthouse, but in this case it is the glass structure and the light inside of it. For me, the way light passes through the dozens of glass prisms, mixed with the intense heat of the room and surrounding view, was quite impressive and resulted in this work of art. This work, Ghosted, is a reduction lino-cut print that consists of two parts: a lino-cut print on paper beneath, and then the same again on a very sheer fabric mounted on top. I wanted to capture something of the warmth of the glow of the object represented, and I found this was more effective with two layers rather than one. Some years ago, I was gifted a book called The Tales of the Marvelous and News of the Strange, which is a collection of medieval Arabic short stories, fairly recently discovered and then translated into English. I was drawn in particular to a story called The Story of the Glass Seller. At a critical moment in the tale, the glass seller accidentally smashes his collection of glassware, and a series of misfortunes unfold. In order to create the print on the left, I made a number of positive images using bits of cardboard, acetate, and masking tape. Again, these are throwaway materials, the byproduct of the screen printing process. I found one piece of these rather aesthetic, and I decided to recreate it using screen printing techniques, but on a glass sheet. This artwork, When Things Become Visible, followed on from the frottage on fabric called When Things Disappear. Both these titles are a direct translation for Dawn and Dusk from the same story that inspired the artwork of Lift 2, The Lesser Gods. In terms of the materials used and the making of these works, both of them resulted from two of many failed attempts at successfully printing a colograph plate. I found the only way I could effectively use that plate and get any depth out of it was through frottage, or in this case by cutting it up and creating a whole new work, stitching together the various fragments.